So in this video, we are going to create the assembly. We're going to take all those parts that we made in the beginner series number 21 and number 22. We're going to put them together in an assembly, and I'm going to show you how we do that. We're going to do it in assembly 4 because our version of FreeCAD 0.19 doesn't support assembly 3 yet. Now version 0.20 will support assembly 3, so we'd be able to do it in assembly 3. But this version does not, and so we're going to use assembly 4. Not to worry, it should work perfectly well. The way that we've designed the parts, they assemble fairly simply, so we should be able to put it all together. So let's go. Let's do this. Now the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use my startup macro. And again, all my startup macro does is it creates a file. I'm going to call this complex assembly 3. And it allows me then to create a sketch. Now I don't actually want to create a sketch, so I will go ahead and just finish it, close it. And I'm going to go back to my model tree, and I'm just going to delete that sketch because I don't need that sketch. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into assembly 4 workbench. If you don't have assembly 4 workbench showing up, you may have to install it. You just add the workbench. We've done that in a previous video, so you should be able to go back and take a look at it. Now what I want to do is I'm going to make sure that my part is current. So I just double clicked it just to make sure that is current. And then I'm going to select my create new assembly model. And there it is. So now what we have is complex assembly 3, a list of parts. There's actually a part in there, and a list of models. That part's actually empty, so I'm actually going to delete that too. Maybe shouldn't have used my startup macro in this one. So we are complete with that. So I need to open up my prior file, and we're going to do that. We'll just open it, and it's called mic stand assembly 2. Apologize. So in my original file here, I have all my parts, or I actually have one part with several bodies. And somebody did ask me about why do I create one part and put all the bodies inside that one part. And I mentioned that one of the things you can do once you create all these bodies, you can actually change it and put them into parts, and we need them all to be in parts to be able to import them into our assembly. So to do that, what we're going to do is we are going to just create new parts. So we're going to go into here, and we're going to say create a part, and we're going to call this triangle body. And then what we're going to do is take that body and just plop it into this triangle body. So now I have a part that has the triangle body. I'd already done the rod part, the rod body into the rod part. And I'm going to do the same for all the rest of these. So let's go back here. We're going to say connector body. So that's a new part called connector body. I'm just going to close these parts up so you can see. I'll take that connector body and I'll drop it straight in here. I'm going to do all the rest of these, and then I'll come back. I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing. Okay, now we have all the parts separated. This first part now is empty, so I don't want to include that. We have the rod part, the triangle part, the connector part, the mic clip part, the mic holder, the C-clamp, the screw, the lower connector, and the pivot rod. So all those bodies are now inside of parts, so we can use them in the assembly. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the assembly, and I'm double clicking it to make the assembly the current model. So we're in assembly 4, and what we're going to do is we're going to import a part. So we'll start with a rod part, and we're going to take that rod part Okay, now we need to take the parts. So I'm going to make sure my mic stand assembly, which is the piece that has all my parts, and I've created all these parts inside it. Remember, I just took the bodies out of this part, one that was just called part. I created new parts and put all the bodies in the subsequent parts. So now what we need to do is we need to create some LCSs that we can assemble these parts with. So I'm going to take rod part. I'm actually going to go back into my assembly 4 worksheet. Sometimes if you click on a body, it will automatically switch you from assembly 4 back into part design. So just be careful with that, because if you click on the body, double click it, it will think you want to do something to model in that. And then what it will do is it will take you back into part design instead of assembly 4. So now I'm in assembly 4, I have my rod part, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an LCS on either end for the holes, because I want to assemble it by these holes. So we're going to do that now. So I'm going to just create, let me just make sure I got in my rod body. Yeah, I don't have any other spurious LCSs. So I'm just going to go in, I'm going to create a new LCS, and I'm going to call it LCS rod part 1. Say OK, and then I'm going to pick, I'll zoom in so you can see, I'm just going to pick this concentric circle, and I'm going to pick over here, I'm going to say concentric, and I'm going to apply that, and now you can see there's an LCS in that hole. So we're going to use that for our assembly. And what I'm going to do is just move to the other end of this rod, and I'm going to stay on this rod part, and I'm going to create a new LCS. So one thing to notice, when I click it, I'm selecting the whole part before I add these LCSs. It can be a bit finicky the way you add them. So this is LCS rod part 2. I'm going to say OK. Pick that concentric circle on this hole. I'm going to say it's concentric. There's my LCS. Say apply. Say OK. Now that part is ready to be assembled into the assembly. Of course, if I put this in on its own, there's nothing else in there. But what I can do is I can make this LCS line up with the LCS of the parent part. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to go into the connector body, I think is the next one I want. So I'm going to turn off this part just by hitting the space bar. And then I'm going to go into the connector body part. Turn that on. Hit this button so I can see what it is. Yeah, that's the piece I need. So now I'm going to make 4 LCSs on here so I can assemble that. Now I'm not going to make you watch through all of this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do it. So I'm going to show you this one. And then when I'm done, I'm going to stop the video. I will go ahead and create all the LCSs in all the parts ready to go. But they're all going to be exactly the same. We're all going to be picking a circle and putting an LCS in every single circle, because that's how it's assembled in this case. So I'll show you how we do this one. So again, my connector body is selected. I'm going to say new coordinate system, connector body 1, and I'm going to make this one, say concentric, say apply, and say OK. Connect the body again, select it, new coordinate system, connect to body 1, 2, pop that on that one, say apply, say OK, and you got it. I'm going to go ahead and just do the same thing for every single one. So this is 3, and concentric, say apply, say OK, and select that body again. Say OK, there, concentric, apply, OK. Now for this connector body, I have 4 LCSs that are lining up with the holes. And in fact, I do have a spurious one on here. I've been playing with this stuff, so some of it I may have added an LCS when I was playing with it earlier, so I'll just get rid of that one. Of course, every part has an origin LCS, but you don't have to have that switched on. So now I have 4 LCSs in that part. I'm just going to switch that one off. and then I'll go to the next one. The next one's actually the triangle part. Do the same thing for that. So I'm going to select it. Here we go. I said I wasn't going to show you all these, but I'll show you one more. Concentric, so apply, so okay. And looks like I already had one on this one as well because I've been messing with it. So I'm going to get rid of that. And then I'm going to say select, okay, select here, and concentric, apply, say okay. And I still have a third one. I don't know where that came from. I don't think that's my origin. So I'll figure that out. I now have 3 here for this guy. I'll figure it out where the other one needs to be, but I'm going to go through all the parts and do that exact same thing, and then I'll see you back here. Okay, I've gone through all the parts. I've added LCSs to all the parts. Now we're going to assemble them into our model. So I'm going to go back into this sheet, and I'm going to make that the current sheet. And then what I want to do is I want to assemble parts into my model. So I'm going to make the model current 2. Then I'm going to bring in a part. And the first part I'm going to bring in is a rod body. Say insert. I'm going to bring it in by its first LCS. And I'm going to say it's going into the parent assembly by the LCS origin. And we'll just say OK to that. So to make it visible, we just have to get to that pocket and then just hit that guy because the pocket was actually switched off when I imported it. So if that's the case, you just have to work your way through the tree till you find the part that's switched off. Okay, so the next piece I want to bring in, I'm going to bring in one of these connector bodies. So again, same thing, we're on here, we're going to say import a part, and I'm going to say connector body, say insert, and the connector body I can connect with one of my LCSs, and I'm going to connect it to my rod part assembly, and I can put it either on that end or this end, and you can see which hole is actually connected there. So if I put it on that end, I probably want to rotate it, and I'm going to rotate it around my Z. I'm going to rotate it 90, and then I'm going to rotate it around my Y. No, didn't want to rotate around my Y. X. There we go. So that's the rotation I wanted. It was actually the X that I should have used. And that has it now aligned the way I want it aligned. And we're just going to look at the offset and make sure that the offset is correct, because we want to make sure that that plate is laying on the side of this guy, which it actually is. So that's very good. If it wasn't, we can translate it right here. We can move it left and right to get it to line up. But that looks like it's lined up okay. And now what I can do is I can bring in a second rod body, and we'll line it up by this one over here. So let's say okay to that. And now let's just import another rod body. That's my rod part. And we are going to connect the rod part by part 1. And there's my rod part over there. We are going to connect it to my connector body, and we're going to go for that one. And it looks like we need to rotate this. And I think we need to rotate it this way to bring it on top. And there you can see I have it connected. The two pieces are connected the way they should be. So I can say okay to that one. And you can see I have 2 rods on a connector. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble another 2 rods on here. Then I'm going to assemble another connector onto the top of those. Of course, we're just going to go through the whole model, and we're going to keep assembling these parts hole to hole, hole to hole, the whole way through the connection. So I'm going to pause this and bring in a few more parts, and when I get to an interesting part, I'll bring you guys back in. Okay, so now you can see I have assembled, I'm just going to bring it to the middle so you can see it all. I've assembled the 4-way connector with 2 rods and a 3-way connector with 2 rods. I'll show you how I bring in a second one of each of these just so you can see. It's a matter of just bringing in, so I want the connector body, I'm going to insert it, I'm going to pick it by one of its holes and see if that's the right one. That's not the right one, I don't think. So let me just tell it that it's going to be connected to rod part, so it's going to be connected to that rod part. And by LCS1, and I can already see that I'm going to need to offset it in the Z by 12, I think. Is my thickness from memory. Yeah. And then I'm going to connect it by different holes until I get the right one. Let me just check. There's one thing I got to check with this. This is a weird shape. It's not symmetrical. So let me just check. So all I'm doing is I'm lining up this this one with this one. So the long side is on that side. What I was looking for. So it needs to go that's not quite right. So the long side is there. So I think it's actually this hole that it needs to be connected on, and then we can rotate that around just to have a look. Yep, I think that's going to be the right place. So roughly in place, say OK, and then I can go down in here. I can fine tune my angle that I have it at. So I'm just going to check that moving the right way. A couple of clicks. And you can see it's moving. Remember, sometimes with these things, they're not dynamic. You have to wait till you click off them and then they show up. Now I'm going to go into the top view. That'll allow me to see this thing when it lines up. So it's rotating on this hole, and I'm going to line this hole up with this hole. So we just go this way. Tab off. So it looks like it's going to be like 240 or something like that. Perfect. And so there I have both of those pieces in. And I'll show you one more time. We'll do the same with another triangle part. So my triangle part is here, and I want it to connect by one of its holes. I want it to connect to that rod part, and we'll say on part 2. So you see, if I select part 1, it's at that end of it. Well, I can just change that. That's pretty easy. And then I'm going to need to offset this guy as well. And it's 12, I do believe. Oh no, that was actually overlapping 2, so it's 10. So remember, this thickness is 2, 2. So when it was in line with there, we only had to move it 10. And then what we're going to do is just flip it around. This one is actually an easier shape. So I'm going to rotate it once, twice, say OK. And then I'm going to go down here to my fine tuning. Yeah, that is the right direction. So I think it's probably going to be 170. Nope, 160 maybe. And there it is. So now I have 2 of those and 2 of those. I'll come back when I get the rest of the parts assembled. Okay, so here's the final assembly. Got to be honest with you, it took a long time to get all the bits together. That's why I didn't want to make you watch me do every single piece. I did have an issue with this part here. The way that this part was designed is it was backwards. When I brought it in and I flipped it, you can only flip one angle. You can only flip it around X, Y, or Z. If you try and do both, it gets very complicated. I don't know a solution to that. I probably would go back into the model and flip it in the model and then import it. But I basically flubbed it a little bit. I made it work, but it's not exactly how I'd like it to be. Everything else is assembled the way I wanted it to be. All of this part, everything is all assembled. I'm not going to try and animate this. It's quite a complicated situation, and I think that would be a bit of a problem. One of the things I notice is when you bring in a part like this and you connect these pieces, it's not easy to say, I want this piece connected to this rod and I want this piece connected to this rod, unless you bring it in that way. But then you'd have to connect these back pieces in as well. So you probably got to give it some thought if you want to animate it. I certainly, if I was going to do something like this and I wanted to animate it, if I thought I was going to animate it, I would take it into Blender, where you can animate things much easier. And to be honest, I can assemble it much quicker and much easier in Blender. I put it together and then just set it all up fairly easily in Blender. So I know some of you guys don't like to use a second piece of software. So that's why I've showed you how to do it here in Assembly 4. I literally just went in, set up my LCSs to all the holes, and then connected it by those LCSs. And if it required an offset, I just offset it. And you can change those offsets. So if I select that part in here, that is a connector body. So if I select that connector body, you'll see here I can do all the offsets right here. So I can, if I needed to offset it, I could offset it from here. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. I appreciate it. It does take a while to put these videos together. I appreciate your support. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.